Good afternoon from London, and thanks for joining this pre-Christmas edition of the Nest Center Midweek Briefing. I'm John Lough. Today's subject is Belarus and the significance of last week's deal between Minsk and Washington that led to the release on Saturday of 123 political prisoners in return for the lifting of US sanctions on 3 Belarusian potash companies. Our guest today is the Lithuanian expert on Belarus, Vytis Jurkonis. Vytis is head of the Vilnius office of Freedom House. As a political scientist, he has a background in policy research on the Eastern Partnership countries. And in 2018, he received the highest award of the Lithuanian Ministry of Foreign Affairs, the Star of Lithuanian Diplomacy. And in 2021, he tells me that he was chosen as the European of the Year for his support to the victims of repression in Belarus and solidarity with Belarusian Democrats. And I understand from Vytis that the political prisoners who were released into Ukraine last week have just actually arrived in Lithuania. So welcome, Vytis. It's great to have you with us.
Thank you. Thank you for having me here.
Well, we've chosen to focus on Belarus this week because we're intrigued here at the Nest Center by this latest example of Lukashenko's deal-making with the United States. So over decades, I think one can say now, Lukashenko has shown the ability to make gestures that can at least temporarily improve relations with Western countries and reduce somehow the pressure of the Russian embrace. He has quite a track record here. But what I think is particularly interesting this time is how he's interacting with the Trump administration that has such clear disregard for the European Union and is seemingly prepared to lift sanctions without coordination with Brussels. And I think we have to note that in September, the US relaxed sanctions on Belavia, the Belarusian national airline, as well as sanctions related to the maintenance of, I think, at least 3 government aircraft. And this was done in return for the release of just over 50 political prisoners. So potash from Belarus is still under EU sanctions, and the Lithuanian port of Klaipėda has been closed to Belarusian exports since February 2022, which has forced Belarusian exporters to find other routes via Russia. So my understanding is that Belarus accounted for around 5% of US potash imports in 2021. And that the main producer, Belaruskali, has significantly increased exports to China since the start of the big war. And effectively, the industry has not suffered a major hit. But let's not forget that at the outset of the war in February 2022, Belarus allowed Russian troops to launch part of the invasion from its territory, giving Russia the shortest land route towards Kiev. So Minsk has definitely not been an innocent bystander in this war. In addition, the number of Russian troops now based in Belarus outnumbers the Belarusian army, another indicator perhaps of how Belarus has taken on really the form of a Russian client state in recent years. Before we go any further, can I please remind our viewers that we have the chat function for questions and comments. We like to keep these sessions interactive, so please don't hesitate to make yourself known and I will try to get to your question or point. So Vytis, let's dive in. And my first question to you is, what do you think the real purpose of this potash deal is? What does the United States get out of it and what in particular does Belarus get out of it?
Well, first and foremost, it's potash, right? We understand that definitely the deal, though the media headlines are more about the political prisoners, and that's an important part of the deal, an important humanitarian aspect of the deal. But in essence, let's be frank that Belarusian regime for them, potash is the main export, the main target of lifting sanctions. So they did that with Belarus, as you mentioned, and potash is the primary objective. So it was all about potash from the very beginning. The only question was the price, right? Certainly, as you mentioned, United States has also a certain interest in the fertilizers. And I think that the biggest issue and surprise when it comes to this particular deal was that most of the political prisoners were rerouted to Ukraine instead of previously Lithuania or the neighboring Poland, which kind of gives a little bit of a hint what might be happening here is that lifting the American sanctions is certainly not enough to actually renew the exports of fertilizers, because the primary destination used to be the Klaipėda port. Because of the EU sanctions, which are not lifted, they are going to be in question in February, still some time to go. I think that the Belarusian side was actually working on the plan of the alternative route, B, and that might be the port in Odessa. And the fact that the political prisoners were greeted and met by Kirill Budanov, who's the head of the intelligence, really high-ranked official, that gives kind of more sense to this alternative plan. Again, there are many ifs. At the moment, Ukraine is at war, Odessa is being bombed, so maybe there's another interest, not only the financial aspect. Nobody would blame Ukraine for having the interest in the Odessa port, but if Americans could also give some sort of reassurances regarding the peaceful sky there, I think it's totally another game. So yes, political prisoners are important. 120 prisoners is a big number, the biggest so far of the recent releases. But at the moment, we need to say it very clear that there's more than 1,000 who still remain in jail. Many of the political prisoners who were released, they were also deported. That's another human rights violation. A number of them were not willing to leave Belarus, but they were forced to without any documents. A number of them, and I know it from the previous group, their sentences were almost about to expire. There was 1 month left after the 4 years of imprisonment. So it's in a way shows the very cynical attitude of the regime to kind of release, but at the very last days of their imprisonment. So yeah, I think that that's how it looks like, where potash is the primary target of the Belarusian regime. I think we shouldn't be mistaken that it's a friendly gesture. No, it's a very cynical interest by the Belarusian regime, which shows also that the sanctions were working despite all the rhetoric, and it was hurting the Belarusian regime, and it's the reason why the political prisoners are released in the first place.
Yeah, I mean, it's an interesting point you make about Odessa. I hadn't thought of that. But what does the American side get out of this, do you think?
Well, the release of political prisoners is one. I think that we see a lot of media coverage regarding that. The administration is also very vocal about that. The special envoy was there. So I think that they are also we've heard that they are very clear about the intentions to release them all. My biggest concern is that once the regime gets the first primary targets of their side, which is Belarus and potash, the question is do we still have enough of leverage in the negotiations? But certainly the determination is there. I think from the various American experts that I was talking to, they were saying that there was this thinking that while talking to Lukashenko, they might be sending the signal to Vladimir Putin as well, that you can actually reach the deal. I think it's a little bit vice versa. I fear, like, because in the eyes of Vladimir Putin, and we had that discussion, I think, 3 years ago, in the eyes of Vladimir Putin, if you are dealing with a relatively weak authoritarian leader like Lukashenko, that might be considered as a signal of weakness. So I think that the United States and whoever else who wants to or intends to have deals with the Belarusian regime, they need to go as hard as possible, because power and pressure is the only language the authoritarian leaders understand. And certainly, let's make no mistake, Vladimir Putin is watching. If we are soft on Lukashenko, then that is going to be the message. So in a way, Belarusian regime is a low-hanging fruit for us, but it's also a low-hanging fruit for Vladimir Putin, if they are testing our determination. So while having the rhetoric that we intend to release other political prisoners, I think we need to have a very solid combination of strength, pressure, and ability to maintain contact and continue this deal making.
Yeah, well, I'm sure that the Russian side is watching very closely. I mean, Trump, after all, has hinted at the possibility of sanctions relief for Russia. And of course, this is a very convenient way of splitting Ukraine's Western allies. And the Lithuanian authorities...
Divide and rule, yeah.
Yes, absolutely. The Lithuanian authorities made it known very quickly that they were not going to be considering any relaxation of sanctions, and the port of Klaipėda, as we've spoken about, remains closed, and there's not going to be any change there. But what is the value, do you think, the American side sees in this relationship with Lukashenko? There seemed to be this idea that he could sort of help get into Putin's mindset, or he could pass messages or something of that kind. Do you think there really is anything in that?
Well, I might speculate where is that coming from, right? Lukashenko, is in the relationship with Putin for more than 2 decades, right? And he seems to be was balancing it pretty well. But I think that since the full-scale invasion, who's watching Belarus, I think that it's pretty clear that Lukashenko has come to its end, where there are serious doubts about the sovereignty and independence of Belarus as such under the rule of Lukashenko, because the space was narrowing down and down. Lukashenko himself basically has taken off all the barricades against the Russian disinformation and propaganda by wiping out all the independent media, the most active parts of the civil society, against this Ruski Mir and whatnot. So in a way, he, because of his personal grip of power, he made the entire country and the entire nation a hostage, much more vulnerable than before. And I think we need to actually learn from his mistakes, understanding that sovereignty and independence cannot rely on solely one person. It's a matter of people, the entire nation. And unfortunately, Lukashenko didn't understand that, and his regime didn't understand. I know from within the system that there were people in 2020 during the massive protests who were suspicious about the democratic forces, and they said they are inexperienced, will remain in the system in order to protect the country because Russians are going to go hard. And since the full-scale invasion, when the Belarusian soil was used for attacking Bucha and Kiev, I think suddenly they realized that they are the vulnerability. They are the traitors of the country who made the attack on Ukraine happen. And it's going to be very, very hard to go back to the situation before 2020. In fact, the regime of Belarus would wish they were in a situation like Armenia now, right, where it's millimeter by millimeter distancing itself from Kremlin. It's not easy. It's not going to happen overnight. But I mean, just think of that. Like Belarus is much more like dependent than Armenia now. Of course, there was a price, Nagorno-Karabakh, but we don't see any movement by the representatives of Belarusian regime to distance themselves. On the contrary, they are fully in the war against Ukraine. Their factories are supplying the Russian market. They are like voting at the UN and other like international institutions the way Kremlin wants. So like the heritage of Lukashenko in a way is that Belarus became fully dependent economy-wise, energy-wise, military-wise on Russia, and it became complicit against the war in Ukraine as well. So I think that even the Wagner criminals are now at the territory of Belarus. You know, how embarrassing is that? So I think that we should not be naive. Lithuania is certainly not naive in this. We are experiencing all sorts of hybrid attacks. The neighboring countries, you remember 2021, instrumentalized migration. Now we have instrumentalized tobacco. We also have 1,000 trucks which are held hostage, Lithuanian trucks, which are held hostages on the Belarus territory. A number of international citizens became hostages and political prisoners. So it's not only an issue that Belarusian regime is taking prisoners and hostages and torturing their own citizens, but they are also taking hostages of other countries, Germany, United Kingdom, France, Latvia, Lithuania, Poland, you name it. So it is a problem and a challenge not only for the Belarusian nation, but also for the regional security.
But in the case of this latest relaxation of sanctions, what I understood was that this was dependent on Belarus demonstrating some better behavior, shall we say. And an understanding was that these balloons flying into Lithuania would be stopped. And I don't know about, obviously, political prisoners, because it seems that they're continuing to arrest and convict people.
Yes, absolutely. Yeah. So the repressions didn't stop. And actually, we are hearing daily of the new political prisoners. As for the balloons, there's an irony, right? Lukashenko was kind of denying that he's responsible of that, but suddenly when the delegation from the United States came, he said, like, we'll see about that. So in a way that shows also a dishonesty. Like, when the Americans ask, he is going to see whether he is going like to control it or not. Well, Belarus is an authoritarian country. It controls basically every aspect, and certainly the border as well. So the balloons, the meteor balloons, they are affecting Vilnius airport depending on the weather conditions. So we don't know whether it's a good intent by the Belarusian regime or it's simply weather conditions. We'll see about that. In any case, the balloons which were there, they disrupted dozens of flights and dozens of thousands of passengers from all over the globe, including actually the Belarusians. Because of the sanctions to Belarus, a number of Belarusians are traveling to Europe via Vilnius airport. So I think it also shows the cynicism and dishonesty by the Belarusian regime. If they are going to change the attitude because of the request of the US officials, good. I think that we'll make a note on that. But, the fundamental question is, can we trust the regime? I mean, is it reliable? And I'd say, based on the years of experience of watching Belarus, We don't see any reason to actually think that any of that kind of deal is going to be sustainable. Plus, there are more of that. There are more hybrid threats, not only the balloons, and we don't see any like meaningful change in this regard. So, however, we see a lot of this divide and conquer, like trying to affect the public mood, trying to affect the Lithuanian business people, saying, yeah, let's lift the sanctions. All of the policy which was there for 5 years was dysfunctional and did not make any like effect. The regime did not collapse. Well, the intent of the sanctions was not to change the regime. And it was not, most of them were not even related to the human rights violations. That was related first and foremost with the downing of the Ryanair flight in 2021, May 2021, right? You remember when the entire aircraft was hijacked from the Lithuanian airspace and forcefully landed. So that's when the sanctions did appear, and that was connected to the regional security issues. And in this regard, we don't see any meaningful change. The fact that Belarus can push the button and make some and disturb the neighboring Vilnius airport and then shows that they are likely to continue these hybrid threats. But if the Belarusian regime is ready to somehow sit down and discuss the regional security issues, and first and foremost, not only for Lithuania and Poland and Latvia, but first and foremost for Ukraine, I think everyone would be interested to hear that. But do you think Belarusian regime is ready?
No, well, they're hardly going to do that, and they certainly don't have the let's say, the sufficient measure of independence and sovereignty to be able to do that.
Exactly. So
we have a few questions that come in, and I think a very important one here from Roland Freudenstein in Brussels, and actually regarding EU sanctions. He says, what would your advice be to the EU in February 2026 when the Belarusian sanctions will have to be rolled over? Would you advise proposing to lift the sanctions, and if so, for what price? And anything beyond political prisoners? And of course, interestingly, John Cole, the US Special Envoy, has expressed optimism that in fact the 1,000 remaining political prisoners will be released, but we don't know what the US is looking for in return. But in terms of the EU sanctions, what would your advice be to the EU?
Well, in a way now, EU and the US, they are acting as a good and a bad cop, right? So I think that sanctions need to remain, the EU sanctions, because as I've said, first and foremost, they were connected to regional security issues. There are a number of issues that the Belarusian regime should actually implement before even any discussion on the lifting EU sanctions. Return back the consular services. This is a very important issue. A number of Belarusians abroad cannot prolong their travel documents, cannot get married, cannot get relevant documents. So it's an important and a humanitarian issue which is affecting basically every single neighbor and beyond, including Germany, including France. Wherever Belarusian diaspora lives, it's affecting these countries because passports are expiring and countries need to come up with some sort of solutions for the Belarusian diaspora, which is afraid to return back. Secondly, as I've said, the sanctions are related to the regional security issues. So any reassurances regarding instrumentalized migration, any reassurances regarding the instrumentalized smuggling of tobacco, any reassurances regarding the safe border of Ukraine from the part of Belarus, Also, any information regarding kidnapped Ukrainian kids. We know that Belarusian regime was hosting a number of the Ukrainian kids, which were like taken by the Russian authorities. So there are a number of issues which need to be discussed, seriously discussed, before any lifting of EU sanctions. Meanwhile, the issue of political prisoners, we would be happy if all the political prisoners are released. But we also know that the number is much higher than the actual, than the Visna website indicates, because a number of political prisoners do not want to be recognized as political prisoners because they are afraid of their family safety. So even if we are talking about another 1,000, the actual number might be higher. And then the question, what is the Red Cross doing? What is the UNHCR doing? So these organizations and institutions or some independent commission needs to be allowed into the detainment centers, like to actually monitor and observe the situation with the political prisoners. Also, a number of political prisoners want to return back because their elderly parents are like in Belarus. So, while release of political prisoners is good, they cannot and they should not be deported, and that condition has never ever was never ever met. So yeah, I think that there are too many items on the plate before lifting EU sanctions, and I hope the EU officials understand that.
Okay, thank you. We have a question here from Amy Kellogg asking if you could say a few more words about the Odessa scenario that we discussed at the outset. She's saying, is Belarus thinking they could use the port even though they're in cahoots with Putin? Well, my understanding was that, yes, they may be thinking that it will be possible to use Odessa at some point. And I think we need to be clear here that when Putin speaks about historical Russian lands, it's hard to imagine that he's not thinking of Odessa as part of Novorossiya.
Yes.
But the idea that somehow, it seems a little bit fantastical, doesn't it, that the Americans might have an interest in helping protect exports through Odessa, and indirectly that could help the Ukrainians. Well, I suppose it's a theory, isn't it? I'm not sure.
It is a theory, a hypothesis. Yeah. I mean, it's just like one of the issues, like why Ukraine, right? Why such a heavy, high-level presence? So that might be the possibility of the alternative route. I'm not claiming that it is certainly the case. But I think that the elements are certainly there. Also, I think someone from the Belarusian regime's officials noted that it was also the exchange, that some prisoners of war from Ukraine were exchanged, some of the Russians and some of the Belarusians, which also sounds interesting. If that's the case, maybe Russia was observing closely this kind of deal. And we know, in fact, that Russia has its own fertilizers. They were exporting the Belarusian fertilizers, but it was not easy because they were overwhelmed with this. So who knows? Generally, I think that we need to understand that in the eyes of Russia, if Belarus is getting closer, warming up with the relations with the Euro-Atlantic community, that's a good thing. That's something what Russia is happy about, because they are 100% sure that they are in control of these processes. And if we can subsidize or help Belarusian economy, then there's it's less of a burden to the Russian economy. So I think that Russia is actually not angry or upset with this warming up of the relations. And as I've said, I think that they are testing also, like, 'cause they have a very close contact with Lukashenko in terms of where is the US administration heading.
Yeah. I think that's undoubtedly true. I mean, I think it's worth just mentioning here that the level of subsidy from Moscow to Minsk, as I understand it, it's probably about $1 billion a year. And it was before the big war, perhaps double that. But it's not a huge amount when you consider the size of the country. So it seems that the Belarusian economy is staying afloat, that, for example, the potash exports are continuing. I mean, this is a big chunk of GDP that hasn't been too adversely affected. So from that point of view, this sort of investment in Belarus is not so costly. But I think you made it to me a very important point earlier, that there are some sections of the elite that felt they were in 2020 during the serious opposition demonstrations that really came very close to bringing down the regime.
Yes.
But at that point, that they were protecting the long-term interests of the country, but have now become complicit in a criminal war. That that effectively alienates those people even further from that silent majority in Belarusian society, which is so deeply opposed to this regime, but yet can't voice opposition without then being sent to jail for 5 years. So there's a long-term problem building up there, it would seem to me, for the Russian authorities.
Well, Belarus became a terror state. So and the terror state means that anyone who is critical, even on issues which are not necessarily related directly to Lukashenko, they might be facing consequences, which in essence is killing any initiative, right? So people within the system are terrified to suggest any innovative ideas. They have also kicked out the entire IT cluster that Belarus was boasting about, right? The major companies, EPAM, Wargaming, Flow, they were leaving the country, and EPAM, if I'm not mistaken, was perhaps the second taxpayer in the entire country, which is insane, So the other thing what the Belarusian regime is facing is that a number of citizens, they don't see any future in Belarus. They want to leave the country because of the brainwashing, because of the changing education system. They don't want to live in another Russia or in the so they are looking for opportunities to relocate and emigrate, and that's a big issue for the economy. If it's not felt today, it is going to be certainly felt in upcoming years.
Yeah, indeed. Vytis, we need to stop there because we're out of time, but thank you very much for your insights today. It's been fascinating to talk to you. I want to thank our audience for being with us, and to remind you that this is in fact the last edition of the briefing in 2025, because Christmas and New Year are both on a Thursday. So we will see you back in the first week of January. But we're very grateful to those of you who are our regular viewers and indeed have provided feedback to us. Please keep it coming. The numbers of regular viewers are in fact growing very encouragingly. And if you're watching via YouTube, please feel free to sign up for the NES Center publications, and you will receive weekly notifications of the upcoming briefings. And we also do a written take on the issue discussed, and you'll find as well other analyses and reports there. So 2026 promises to be another, I think, very demanding year for those of us in this business, and Vytis is no exception. So we hope you'll stay with us. We have plenty of reports on their way, and we look forward to sharing them with you. Meanwhile, we wish all our viewers a happy Christmas and a successful New Year. And we'll be back on Thursday, the 8th of January. Vytis, thank you very much indeed.
Thank you very much. Happy holidays.